Renting versus purchasing. We see this debate a lot online. In this video, I ran the numbers so that you don't have to. If you're thinking about buying a home and maybe weighing that versus renting in the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area in 2026, by the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer picture as to which one can give you a better return, or at least at a minimum, give you an idea as to how you should be thinking about these things. Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Living in Oregon, I'm your host, Seth Marchant, licensed real estate broker in the state of Oregon and Washington. Or if you're new to this channel, Living in Oregon, we show you what it's like to live here. We've got over 200 videos on our channel, touring you through neighborhoods with driving footage, drone footage, showing you all the pros and cons, pretty much everything that you need to get a sense as to where you might like to live in the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area. So if you want to see more videos like this that we drop every single week, make sure and subscribe to this channel. And today, I want to answer the question for a lot of people out there that are sort of on the fence, debating, should I rent, should I buy? Where is going to be a better investment for my dollar? And for anybody that's asking themselves that question, I'm sure you've seen this debate in a lot of places and a lot of different opinions online. And so some of the reasons why you're seeing some different opinions online is because there is no definitive answer for this question. And there is no definitive answer because this is a personal finance question, meaning the answer is personal. It's different for everybody. And that's kind of what I'm going to take you through with some of these numbers. I'm going to give you some ranges comparing purchasing in Portland, Oregon versus renting. I'm going to use the average home price, which is about $600,000 with 20% down. And just even kind of right away getting into some of these numbers, this is where things get a little bit tricky because you don't necessarily need to have 20% down. 20% down with a conventional loan will typically get you the best interest rate. So that's the reason why you kind of hear that magic number of 20%. But there are other loans out there, other unconventional loans like a VA loan that requires 0% down, or an FHA loan that you can put as little as 3.5% down. Now, all of these different packages, all these different offerings, these different types of loans are going to have different fees and structures and things like that. So you're not just looking at down payment and an interest rate, but for simplicity, in this video, I want to compare apples to apples as much as I possibly can. So I'm going to take the average home value, which is about $600,000 right now in the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area. Interest rates, right about 6.3% for a 30-year conventional loan. Putting 20% down, that's a loan amount of $480,000. That gets us a monthly payment of $3,500. And rent right now in the Portland metropolitan area for kind of an average home, say 3, maybe 4 bedrooms, right around like say around 2,000 square feet, it's going to be right about $3,000 a month. So kind of low 3,000s is the numbers that I found. And so that's going to put us kind of apples to apples, at least as far as your monthly payment goes with a mortgage. So now here's where the numbers can get kind of tricky because we're going to have to speculate on a lot of different things. The New York Times actually has kind of an interesting calculator where you can put in all sorts of all of these different types of metrics to compare renting versus purchasing, and they will give you an idea. In this case, with some of the numbers that I inputted, it says buying saves you, or could rather say makes you, $166,000 over 10 years. I'll run you through some of these numbers in just a moment, but let me show you some of my numbers first. So here's where you're going to have to start to speculate. What is going to be your return on your investment? So I wanted to give you a range. So I went anywhere from as low as 2% up to 6.5%. And I chose 6.5% because over the last 10 years, homes on average have gone up 6.5% in the Portland metropolitan area. So let's say you purchased a home 10 years ago, $600,000 at a 2% year over year annual increase. At the end of 10 years, that's going to be a $131,000 difference. So kind of on the low end, we're looking at $131,000. On the very high end, people that have owned homes for the last 10 years in the Portland metropolitan area have almost seen their home values around double or so. So a $600,000 house 10 years ago would be worth $1.125 million now. So here's some of the things that you're going to need to factor in. Maintenance. What is your expense going to be? Well, if you buy a brand new home, over the course of 10 years, maintenance is going to be, they say the average is anywhere from like 0.5 to 2%, somewhere around 1%. Well, if you buy a brand new house in 10 years, you're really not going to have any major maintenance expenses. Typical things that might go out, a water heater, an appliance like a microwave. I mean, you might be looking at a couple $1,000s. But again, we're talking about average homes. So the average home, Portland metropolitan area, maybe about 30 years old or so. So you're going to incur anywhere from 0.5 to maybe 2% expenses for maintenance every single year. So that's anywhere from $3,000 to $12,000 a year. That's $30,000 to $120,000 over the course of 10 years. And when you go to sell your property, typically you're going to walk away with net about 93% of the sale price after you factor in fees, the realtor broker fee, negotiations with the inspection period, anything that the buyer may be asking you to buy, a safe number to fix rather. A safe number is usually about 7%. So you're going to walk away with about 93% net. So if we subtract maintenance, sales percentage of 7%, taxes, we're going to say no taxes in this case. So capital gains taxes after you've been at a primary residence for 2 years is exempt up to $250,000 for a single filer and $500,000 for a joint filer. You do have deductions. Mortgage interest is one of them. Property taxes is another. That's going to be a little bit too complicated for me to factor. So I'm just going to factor in for about a $600,000 house, you might save about $6,500 a year in tax deductions for mortgage interest, which would give you $65,000 over the course of 10 years. And your balance after 10 years would be about $398,000. So if we take best case scenario, a $1.125 million house, we subtract our expenses, our sale, include deductions, subtract the balance of the mortgage, which would be $398,000 after 10 years. If I did that with kind of the best case and the worst case, here's some of the math that I'm coming up with. Worst case scenario at 2% appreciation, going to be walking away with about $107,000 in your pocket. That includes subtracting the $120,000 initial investment of your down payment. Best case scenario for people over the past 10 years that experienced about 6.5% appreciation, you'd be walking away with about $563,000 in your pocket. And you would have paid $3,500 a month for 12 months over the course of 12 years. That's $420,000. And as I'm going to show you here in a moment with your rent, that's going to be very close to actually what your rent would be out of pocket. So low end walking away with $100,000, high end $563,000. What does that compare to rents? So the idea with renting is that you would take the excess capital that you have, in this case, like your down payment, because we're kind of going apples to apples here. Actually, I set the rent at $3,000 a month, which again is a little bit on the lower side. You're probably looking at like low threes, $3,100, $3,200, $3,300 a month for an average single family home in the Portland metropolitan area. So if you were to take that $120,000 and invest it in the stock market, specifically the S&P, which has averaged about 12% over the past 10 years. I think historically it's been closer to maybe 8 or 9%. So we've been in more of a bullish market over the past 10 years. So if we're saying the market maybe didn't perform too well, let's say at 6%, that's a $94,000 difference. You would have made $94,000 that you could have put in your pocket if you were renting as opposed to buying. At 8%, $139,000, 10%, $191,000. And then kind of on the upper end of what we've seen for the past 10 years, realistically, the best you might possibly do is making about $253,000 average from the S&P 500. Once you go to sell those stocks, you will typically pay capital gains taxes, which are going to be anywhere from 15 to 20%. Your rent at $3,000 a month for 120 months at a 4% annual increase, which has been the average for Portland for the past 10 years. You would have spent $449,000, so about $450,000 over the course of 10 years. Again, going back to your mortgage, you would have spent about $420,000 over the course of the 10-year at that fixed rate of $3,500 a month. And where does that kind of even out? Right around year 5 or 6, your rent is going to increase around $3,500 a month. Now, you could have taken that $500 a month difference between the $3,000 and $3,500 and invested that in the stock market. Of course, once you get past year 6, you're going to be above $3,500. So there's going to be a difference there that the purchaser could have used to take that excess between the $3,500 and what they might have paid for rent if they weren't purchasing and invested that into the stock market. It really kind of works out to be about a wash. Again, I'm trying to compare apples to apples as much as possible. So when you pay your taxes on your capital gains from the stock market, worst case scenario, at about a 6% gain, you're looking at about a $75,000 return. Best case scenario, you're looking at about a $215,000 return. So again, if we're comparing the two, the low end, not a whole lot different, 107 to 75, but the high end, and again, we've had a very bullish housing market and also a bullish public equities stock market over the past 10 years. The high end for the purchase has a lot more upside than the renter. I share this with you, of course, being cognizant of I am a real estate broker. I'm sure there's going to be comments, there's usually some thought of like bias. I've probably said it before in other videos. I don't believe that I've ever talked anybody into purchasing a home, and I'm not here to do that here today. If you don't think buying a home is right for you, then it probably isn't. I just wanted to share the math with some of you because you see so many different things online, and there's a lot of different ways to create your own formula to kind of get an idea as to what these numbers are going to look like. And as we kind of saw, there's a lot of speculation as well. So I mentioned the New York Times has this a calculator where you can put in your purchase price, your monthly rent. So try to compare apples to apples as much as possible in here with $600,000 purchase price, which would be the same as your mortgage for $3,500 a month payment. Plan to stay for 10 years. Mortgage details, 6.3% interest, 20% down for 30 years. You've got advanced options in here where you can play around with what you think the home price growth rate will be and what your return on investment would be for the stock market, so for you renters. And that's kind of where you see the numbers really change. So if you don't see enough home price, let's just say homes went up, I don't know, let's say 3% over the next 10 years. Well, if you can get 12% on the stock market, then renting is going to make a lot more sense. Renting is going to make you an extra $93,000 a year. So these two variables, how much is home prices going to appreciate and how much can you extract from the stock market? Or, of course, it could be anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be the stock market. Anywhere you can invest money, that's just more of the obvious one, particularly to more of the layman investor. And then beyond that, of course, there's going to be other considerations as well. If you do go conventional loan with 20% down, you're going to need a lot of cash out of pocket. Maintenance, like we talked about. When you rent, you've got a landlord to help take care of things for you, which can be a positive or a negative. Sometimes landlords aren't the most helpful people. So sometimes it can be a hassle having to wait for your landlord to fix something. Flexibility, they can both give you certain degrees of flexibility in that renting doesn't pin you down sometimes as much depending on what your lease terms are. Purchasing can give you some flexibility in that you might be able to buy somewhere or end up in a neighborhood where you might not have otherwise been able to rent. So they're both going to provide different levels of flexibility. Freedom, you're typically going to have more freedom when you purchase because you can do, for the most part, kind of whatever you want within local zoning or depending on what local ordinances are with your home. You don't need to ask for your landlord's permission. Some people like that peace of mind, having a little bit more certainty to know that they can be in a particular area for as long as they want to be in an area, so they don't have to worry about the landlord selling the property and then they have to potentially move. Taxes are going to be something you want to speak to your CPA about. There's a lot of tax advantages of purchasing, and again, that's kind of where it makes sometimes these equations difficult because it's going to be different for everybody. And then forced savings, that's just the concept or like the idea that if I have to pay a mortgage every single month, I'm going to make that payment no matter what, and I know that money's going to get allocated towards that. Whereas the renter that maybe has that excess $120,000 that they didn't have to use for a down payment, they may or may not be diligent about investing that money. Or maybe you're considering a little bit more of an apples to oranges case where your mortgage payment is a lot higher than your rent payment. And you're asking yourself, well, am I going to be disciplined enough to take that difference between what I would have paid in rent and a mortgage payment and use that money to invest it every single month? Some people know themselves and they know they're not going to be disciplined enough to do those sorts of things. So they would prefer to purchase where they can just know that their money is going towards their mortgage every single month. They don't need to think about the investing aspect of it. And of course, that will depend on how savvy of an investor you are. Maybe you're a super savvy investor and it makes sense to rent and have some excess liquid that you can do things with. Maybe it doesn't have to be in the stock market. Maybe you can get a greater return than 12%. So like I said, I'm not going to try and talk anybody into purchasing a home, but for the vast majority of people, it's going to be much simpler to get a greater return on their investment if they purchase, at least in the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area. That those numbers are going to vary from market to market. So if you have more questions about this, like I said, if you're on the fence, if you're thinking about purchasing, if you're trying to weigh out renting versus purchasing, if you have any questions at all about buying a home in Oregon or Washington, I invite you to call, text, email, however you want to get in touch. You can hit that QR code. That'll take you to our website, or you can find all of our contact information in the description of this video. And of course, if you want to see more videos, most of the videos on our channel are showing you about what it's like to live in the Portland metropolitan area. So if you want to see more videos, you can visit the channel now, or make sure and subscribe. That way we will pop up once a week in your feed every single week with a new awesome video about what it's like to live in the Portland metropolitan area. And if there's any helpful information in this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit that like button, lets me know that I'm doing a good job. And until next time, take care, everyone.